Today I'd like to look at this map here with you. It's about the 8 biggest language families in the world. Here on the left-hand side we have some information on what a language family is. It says 3 billion people today speak an Indo-European language. That makes it the biggest language family of the world, and German belongs to this family too. Additionally, it includes the North Germanic languages such as Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, Icelandic, and the language of the Faroe Islands. So this entire region up here it says when different groups of people start to geographically move away from one another, they develop their own tribal languages. These, however, still have similar characteristics and are based on the same principles, and that's what you would call a language family, meaning you'll have multiple languages that have a similar sound, structured in a similar way, and are spoken in specific locations, which, well, that's obvious. If they aren't spoken, they're dead languages. So we would have these Germanic languages here, and is that it includes German, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, I think the Faroe Islands would be here, and Icelandic then somewhere up here. However, the Germanic languages are part of a bigger language family, and that's actually what we want to look at here. They would be part of Indo-European, or in German, it's often still called Indo-Germanic. So this language family also includes the Celtic languages, the Italic languages, the Baltic and Slavic ones. Here we have Albanian, Greek, Armenian. And here on the eastern side we have 2 more big branches, Iranian and Indian. So the theory is that long time ago, probably around 3500 BC, the historic Indo-Europeans left somewhere around here in the Pontic-Caspian steppe near the Black Sea. And from here they split up into different groups. Some moved west, some moved east, and their languages over time slowly started to change and developed into all these different languages. All in all, today there are almost 450 languages classified as Indo-European, and altogether there are 3 billion people that speak an Indo-European language. That of course also has to do with colonialism. The Americas are home to Indo-European languages today. Large parts of Africa, Australia, also here in Asia. So they've become different lingua francas of the world. Some of these languages that are spoken everywhere are English, Russian, Spanish, and Portuguese. Of course, French. But then some of the largest families also found here in these two groups. The Indian branch, for example, has Hindi and Urdu, as well as Bengali and Punjabi, which all have more than 100 million speakers. And these two branches account for half of the Indo-European speakers, 1.5 million, so that's quite impressive. And today maybe the similarities aren't always obvious, but historically when people still used a lot of Latin and Greek, they noticed these similarities to Sanskrit, and that's how over time the theory of this large language family was born. And today I think Indo-European is probably one of the most comprehensively researched language families. You'll find tons of information if you have a look around. Even a reconstructed Proto-Indo-European language. So we have an idea what it sounded like back when it was spoken by a small tribe here near the Black Sea. Alright, but let's look on to the next one. Here we have the Turkic language family. This one's a bit smaller. It has only about 1/10 of the number of languages, something like 35, and about 200 million speakers. And most of them can be found in this branch here, in the Oghuz branch. It includes Turkish, which accounts for 40% of all Turkic speakers. So this is by far the biggest branch of this family. And maybe the design of this map isn't ideal, because if we compare it to Argu right here, next to the Oghuz branch, I looked it up because I'd never heard of Argu, and it says that today this is one language called Kalai, I think it's pronounced, which is spoken in about 50 villages, and about 50 years ago there were 20,000 speakers. So that's a really, really small branch of the language, especially compared to Oghuz and Standard Turkish. But of course, based on this map here, you would not be able to tell. Many of the Turkic languages are spoken here in this area, in Central Asia. And a number of them are actually quite closely related, especially in this branch here, Kipchak, which would include, for example, Kyrgyz or Kazakh. You would probably be able to understand either of these languages if you spoke one of them. Then you also have some Turkic languages all the way here in the north, in Siberia. So they are present in Russia too, as well as somewhere in this area here, in Tuva, for example, which is one of the Russian republics. There are some famous throat singing bands from there, so that's how I know about that language. And they're even spoken in parts of China, for example by the Uyghurs. So quite a large family. And historically, there have been some theories that Turkic might be related to Mongolian, maybe even to Japanese or Korean, but those theories have not been proven. There would have been the Altai family. There are also other theories that might be related to the oral languages like Finnish or Hungarian, because they share some grammatical features, but that too has not been established. So for now, the Turkic family stands on its own. Right, then let's move on here. This big red circle is Sino-Tibetan with only 2 branches. This would be Sinitic, and here the smaller one would be Tibeto-Burman. So this includes Tibetan with 6 million speakers and Burmese with 33 million. Quite small compared to Sinitic, which includes all of the Chinese languages with 1.3 billion speakers. So this little circle here includes 95% of the entire language family. I'm also not sure whether this shouldn't be the other way around, but I'm not going to question it. That's how the book was designed. So, quite a large area with a great number of speakers. However, other than with the Indo-European languages, we don't have a reconstructed Proto-Sino-Tibetan language. And because we don't have that language, we're also not quite sure where the language originated. There are some theories that it might come from the Tibetan plateau from sometime around 4000 BC, but other theories suggest that it comes from northern India from 7000 BC, so that would make it a really, really old language. It's quite fascinating how long these languages have been around. And of course, within the Sinitic branch, you have a really big variety of different languages that in the West we often just know as Chinese, but there's a little more to that than just one Chinese language. Right. Let's move on further east. Here we have Japonic, which includes only 12 languages, but they're spoken by 130 million speakers across these islands. They include 2 branches: Japanese, which makes up the largest part of the family, and the Ryukyu languages. I hope I'm pronouncing this somewhat correctly. There are a number of languages here that belong to this family, all spoken in the southern islands of Japan. They're native to this region, and the speakers vary from 100,000 to just 400 speakers for the smallest language. So a number of them are classified as endangered, 6 of them in fact, because there are so few native speakers. And historically they've often been classified as Japanese dialects, but they are in fact quite far removed from Japanese, and interestingly also from one another. So if you speak one of these Ryukyu languages, you would not be able to understand the other one. So they're not just dialects of each other, they really are separate languages. Of course, sometimes it's not quite easy to tell what is a language and what's a dialect. And that's quite noticeable with our next language, which is Austronesian. Austronesian counts as the 2nd biggest language family in the world, based on the number of languages included, which is 1,200. Now, what's really interesting is that we only have two branches. Here the Formosa languages and here the Malayo-Polynesian languages. And all of these language families that belong to Austronesian are located here in Taiwan, all except for one, which is Malayo-Polynesian. So you have this huge diversity here in Taiwan, which is also called Formosa, hence Formosa languages. And the theory is that that's why the entire language family originates from this area. Usually the area where you have the biggest linguistic diversity is also where the language comes from. It probably crossed over from what today would be China, something like 4,000 years ago, but it might have been even earlier. And then later, people started to leave their island towards the south and the west. They would settle here on these many, many islands, where you have languages like Malay or Tagalog that are included in this family. They went all the way over here to Madagascar, in front of the African coast. So you would have an Austronesian language over here. They arrived here probably around 500 AD. They also went this direction up here of our map towards Hawaii, where they arrived something like 900 AD. And down here where we see just a tiny little corner of New Zealand. So the Maori language is also included in this family. And they arrived here around 1200 AD, so 800 years ago. Austronesian is a made-up term, which just means southern islands. It was invented to classify all of these languages together. And with 380 million speakers, it's the 5th largest language family in the world. Again, in terms of speakers, in terms of languages, it's the 2nd largest, but of course that depends a little bit on what you would classify as a dialect and what you would classify as a language. Now, let's go back west, back here towards India, because we have another big language family here, Dravidian. This one includes 80 languages with 250 million speakers. You can see it's divided into 3 branches: Southern, Central, and Northern. And interestingly, here in between, you would have the Indo-European languages, so the Southern and Central are separated from the Northern parts of the language. In fact, the Northern Dravidian languages aren't even located in India anymore. They're a little bit further north. The theory is that long time ago, the entire Indian subcontinent was home to these Dravidian families. And later, the Indo-Europeans moved in from the north and pushed the Dravidian families to the south. they've been in close contact for so long that they've taken on features from one another. So already in Sanskrit you can find a lot of Dravidian words, and the Dravidian languages took on a lot of these structures of the Indo-European language families that came in. Alright, then here we have the Afro-Asiatic languages. Sometimes they're also called Semito-Hamitic languages. Basically means the same thing. They include 300 languages and 500 million speakers. Most of them included in this branch here, the Semitic branch. Now you probably know the languages that are included in this Semitic branch. For one, Arabic, by far the biggest language in this family with over 300 million speakers. But Semitic also includes Hebrew and Aramaic, which is an ancient language that was spoken in large parts of this area historically. Another famous historic language is included here, the ancient Egyptian language. Sounds to have been spoken in a larger area, not just in this corner. Of course, in Egypt today people speak Arabic, so a language of a related branch. But the ancient Egyptian language does still exist in the form of Coptic, which is used in the Coptic church. It's not really a language for everyday use anymore, so I don't think there are people who actually speak it in their day-to-day lives, but it is still in use in certain circumstances. Right, then down here we have the Cushitic family, which was spoken the Horn of Africa. It includes, for example, the Somali language, and this one is also really, really old. So probably at least 5,000 years, but it says it might date back to the early Holocene, so that will make it something like 10,000 years old, which is really, really amazing. Of course, it would have changed quite substantially in that time frame. And there are probably many, many different varieties. But nonetheless, they can be traced back that far. Then next to it you have Omotic, which includes languages spoken in Ethiopia. Further north you have Chadic, which includes Hausa, a language that is quite common here in this area as a lingua franca, so as a way to communicate with each other if you don't have any other language in common. Wikipedia says that Hausa is used in inland, eastern, West Africa, so probably around here. And then we also have the Berber languages. You might remember those from a different video because they have their own alphabet, and they are today used in official capacity in Morocco and Algeria. Alright, and with that we have one language family left, which is probably the most impressive one. It's the largest one here, and that's the Niger-Congo language family. It includes Dogon, Atlantic, Mande, Ijoid, Volta Congo, and here we have Kordofanian. Now, I've been trying to read up on this language family, and I have a feeling that the information on the English Wikipedia articles and on the German articles are a little different in how they classify this language. Basically, the German ones say, oh yeah, it's definitely an established language family, whereas the English ones say, well, it's a theory, and there are some holes in that theory. I don't know, I'm not too familiar with any of these language families here, but either way is quite interesting. Basically, the Niger-Congo languages would include most of the languages here in Southern Africa, all the way here across the Atlantic coast. They include more than 1,500 languages, which makes it the biggest language family in the world, and 500 million speakers, which, relatively speaking, is not that many in comparison. So you have a huge linguistic diversity with many small languages. The biggest languages include, for example, Yoruba and Igbo, which would be spoken in this area here, Nigeria, each with 20 million speakers. You would have Fula a little further north, about the same size. You would have Shona in Zimbabwe, Zulu in South Africa, and Swahili, which is spoken in large parts of Southern Africa, again as a lingua franca, so a way to communicate with each other. Swahili is spoken by probably about 80 million people. Now, if we look at the language family itself, the core of it would be this part here, the Atlantic languages. Now this one's pretty well established. It includes, for example, Wolof and Fula, and it has a very typical noun class system. Noun classes are similar to grammatical genders. So for example, if you learn German, you have to learn whether a word is der, die, or das. So masculine, feminine, or we would also have neuter in German. Noun classes are a little bit different in that they categorize their nouns based on different criteria. So they could be animate or inanimate objects. It could be people, animals, plants, and anything else. In the south here you have up to 20 different noun classes. Usually individual languages would only use up to 10, but there's a really big diversity in terms of how these classes are established. So basically, the Atlantic side of the language family uses these very specific noun classes. Now, the problem is, neither the Mande languages nor the Dogon languages use these classes, and without these two families, the entire construct apparently becomes a bit wobbly. There are some theories that maybe these two families just split off pretty early on when the noun classes weren't established yet. In some other article I also read it's possible that they got lost later, which of course could be. Just think of English, which does not use grammatical genders the way German or Russian does. So of course these are features that might have gotten lost. lost. In itself, the Mande family is incredibly diverse, so this huge diversity that you have in the Indo-European family, spread out over half of 2 continents, you could also find here in just a small area of Africa. So, small language family with huge diversity. But the languages that are included here definitely are connected with each other, so that's well established. With Dogon, like I said, it's also somewhat unclear. It is theorized to belong to the Niger-Congo languages. It's also quite clear that the language was established in Mali and historically has been in Mali for a very long time. But it could be that it's also related to a different language family that you would be able to find here. It's a somewhat smaller one, so it's not included in this map. It would be the Nilo-Saharan language family. But again, just a theory. The biggest part of the Niger-Congo family would be here, the Volta-Congo languages. They basically start here and then include all of the southern part of Africa. The most famous languages are probably the Bantu languages, which make up 350 million speakers, so a third of all African speakers speak Bantu. And again, really big diversity. It's something like 500 languages, but the numbers range from 440 to 680, again, depending on what's a language and what's a dialect. So, we said earlier, Swahili would be found in this area. This too would be a Bantu language. And in general, the Bantu languages, they do have these noun systems that we have in the Atlantic families. So this is probably a bit easier to establish that these are related. But all in all, I think it really depends on what kind of authors you read. Telling you how sure that theory is, or how big the holes are. I don't really know. Okay, so let's go over it again. We started off with the Indo-Germanic family, where we have the Balto-Slavic branch, the Germanic branch, the Celtic families, Italic, Albanian, Greek and Armenian, Iranian and Indian. We have the Turkic languages with the Siberian branch, the large Oghuz branch, very small Argu one. We have Kipchak and Karluk, and this one is Oghurian. We have the Sino-Tibetan language family with the Semitic and the Tibeto-Burman languages. We have Japonic with only 12 languages in the family, Japanese and a number of small Ryukyu families. We have Austronesian, the second largest language family in terms of languages. All branches but one located in Formosa or Taiwan. And then the Malayo-Polynesian languages. Going all the way over here, including Maori and Hawaiian. We have the Dravidian languages of India, the northern, central and southern branch. The Afro-Asiatic languages, biggest branch being Semitic. Very, very small branch being the ancient Egyptian language with Coptic. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 additional branches. And the largest family in the world in terms of included languages, Niger-Congo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 branches. And then, of course, you would also have large and diverse families in the Americas. However, the indigenous languages often have a smaller number of speakers than the languages included here. Hence, they aren't on this map. But maybe we could have a look at that another time with a different book. So I think for today, we're gonna leave it at that. And out of these 100 cards and maps, I think looking at one is probably enough to make you feel sleepy and relaxed. So, thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again next time.